Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Diana, for Speaking Into the Void. To those who are new listeners, welcome. I appreciate the time you're taking out of your day to listen to my podcast. To my returning ones, thank you guys for the endless support. I feel like I've covered a lot in my last episode, but without really going deep. It was more of a short reflection on my self-love journey and how far I've come. I went into that episode telling myself, don't overthink, just let it flow. And that's exactly what I did. And I forget sometimes that when I'm recording, I'm really just having a conversation with my listeners, which is funny because in real life, dude, I can talk forever. Like my last phone call some time ago with one of my closest friends was 7 hours. 7 hours. Yeah, I know. You're probably like, that's a lie, Dan. I can't even go 10, like making her podcast no longer than 10 minutes. But it's true. It's true. We talked on the phone for 7 hours. With the people I'm close to, we can just talk about anything and everything nonstop. So clearly, I need to bring that same energy here. And trust me, I'm working on making my episodes longer this year. But the reason why I bring this up, because that same friend, the one that I talked to for 7 hours, has called me out more times than I can count. She's always like, Diana, you run from how you actually feel. And I'm here just like, no, I don't. Like, I'm fine. So many scenarios I've gone through, and I'm just like, it's fine. It is what it is, and move on. And today, we're talking about something I'm really bad at, sitting with my emotions. Not distracting myself, not sprinting away, not pretending I'm fine, just sitting, feeling, existing. This episode is for anyone who runs from their emotions like they're being chased because, hi, that's me. So let's start where this habit even came from. This episode came from me realizing how often I learned to move forward without really processing how things felt. In my episode about being vulnerable, I have mentioned for most of my life, I didn't know how to handle my emotions. Whenever something heavy came up, sadness, anger, loneliness, hurt, my first instinct was to avoid it. I would distract myself, stay busy, write free writes, laugh it off, push it down, anything but actually face what I was feeling. I didn't know at the time, but that was survival mode. It was little girl me trying to protect herself and feeling she didn't know how to hold. When you grow up like that, those habits follow you. Like, I didn't wake up one day and decide to run away from my emotions. It's just something I learned. I don't know if, it had anything to do with me not feeling seen, understood, or, afraid to open up. In other words, I felt as if I didn't want to be too much or a bother. I think that mindset, my behaviors of avoiding how I truly felt, reflected within my family, friends, past relationships, and even in the current long-term relationship I'm in. It was a feeling of being scared to speak up, afraid of what others would think, feel of how I truly felt towards something. As, I've mentioned in another episode that my sisters are older than me. My oldest sister that I was closer to, she started her life when I was in 6th grade. My parents were being parents. My dad, I never wanted to sit and, discuss certain things. Mom, we never really went into depth of how I truly was feeling. Throughout middle school, high school, time after high school, any time I truly was ever feeling went on paper in my journal, along with, my root of feeling insecure with myself. In any situation, I'd feel like my feelings would just cause tension and conflict. So what did I do to avoid feelings and run and not fully deal with how I truly was feeling? My feelings were like, run, Diana, run, like Forrest Gump. I don't know, I just had to add that in there. That became normal for me. And what's scary is how normal it felt. That was the beginning of me learning how to keep things to myself. It's funny enough that I'm currently living through something that made this episode feel necessary for me to record. I want to share something gently because this episode comes from a place of reflection, not blame. I realize that I'm in the middle of a situation where there's a distance in a family member, and it started from a miscommunication that I take responsibility for. I've apologized. I've stayed on the no reply, and right now I'm just sitting in that space. What this has brought up for me isn't anger, it's awareness. I noticed that in moments of conflict, my instinct has always been to move forward quietly without really talking about how things felt. And I don't think that came from a bad place. I think it came from me wanting peace, from wanting things to be okay. But for me, healing has looked like understanding my emotions instead of skipping over them. Not to relive anything, but to release it. And realizing that difference is what made me reflect of how I learned to handle emotions in the first place. That realization made me look back at how often I learned to avoid emotions instead of sitting with them. And avoidance doesn't always look dramatic. Most of the time, it's quiet. The tricky part, running away from avoiding how you feel doesn't feel like that in the beginning. It feels more of, I don't let things get to me type of energy. People might even compliment you for it, tell you how calm you are, how whatever you're going through doesn't affect you. But what they don't see is you just know how to deal, process it all. The emotion of holding your breath, the way you don't let yourself react because you don't trust what might come out. Avoidance looked like telling myself, it's not that serious, even when it was. I downplayed my feelings constantly. I'd compare my pain to other people's and convince myself I didn't deserve to feel that way like I did. Like others had it worse than what I was going through and how I was feeling. And it also looked like humor. So I joked my way out of uncomfortable feelings. I laughed at things that actually hurt me. I turned pain into jokes. It's quiet in my avoidance. And that's why it lasted so long. It's like that saying, laugh now, cry later, is how I've always saw how I felt. I'd crack a joke to convince myself not to feel. Avoidance showed up in how I communicated too. I'd say things like, it's whatever, I don't care, I'm chill, I'm good. But those words were just shields. They kept people from looking closer. They kept me from looking closer. Throughout my life, I've been put in situations where I wasn't okay with something or things bothered me. So I would convince myself that everything was fine and it wasn't worth to talk about. So instead of speaking up, my emotions of how I felt, I went quiet. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. Avoidance also looked like emotional disconnection. So I'd feel myself shutting down in serious conversations, my mind would drift, my body would tense, and I wouldn't even realize I was even checking out until later. I avoided emotional conversations because I didn't trust what would come out if I opened my mouth, if I opened that door. I was scared. I wouldn't know how to stop, once I started. Scared I'd cry, scared I'd say too much, scared I'd feel too much. So instead, I controlled myself by not feeling at all. And the wild part, I thought this was normal. I thought everyone lived like this. So I've been told by the friend that I mentioned in the beginning that she's the one that's called me out when I previously have told her certain situations I've gone through. She's just like, no, Diana, it's okay to feel stop acting how you felt at the time. Doesn't bother you. I'm just here laughing girl, what? I am feeling it's so whatever's. But she's a good friend. she's the one that actually asks like how you feel and so much else. So slowly I've opened up to her, like, about certain situations of my feelings I've chosen to avoid. Here's what nobody tells you. When you don't process emotions in real time, they don't disappear. They store themselves in your body, your reactions, your relationships. So instead of feeling sadness when it happened, I felt irritability weeks later. Instead of addressing her, I built quiet resentment. Instead of expressing disappointment, for a long time, I thought avoiding my emotions was keeping me safe. I thought if I didn't feel things fully, they couldn't hurt me fully. But avoiding my emotions didn't make life lighter. It made it heavier in ways I didn't understand at the time. Ignored hurt, didn't stay quiet. It showed up as distance. I pulled away from people without really knowing why. I'd feel disconnected even when I wasn't alone. The hardest part was confusing how it all felt. I'd have moments where I snapped at someone I cared about and immediately thought, why did I react like that? I'd feel irritated by the small things and then feel guilty for it. I'd feel overwhelmed and not know where it was coming from. Because the truth was, I wasn't reacting to the moment. I was reacting to everything I hadn't let myself feel before. Avoiding my emotions also affected how connected I felt to myself. I didn't trust my instincts because I wasn't listening to my emotions. And when you don't trust yourself emotionally, you second guess everything. I know because, clearly this is me. Decisions felt harder. Boundaries felt confusing. My needs felt unclear. In every situation I've ever been in, I wasn't reacting to what was happening. I was reacting to everything I hadn't let myself feel. In many situations in my life, I realized at some point I had to pause and be honest with myself. Not in a dramatic, life-altering way, just in that quiet, uncomfortable way where you can't unsee something you once noticed it. I kept telling myself I was healing, that I had grown, that I was doing better, and maybe in some ways that was true. But when I really sat with it, I realized a lot of my healing was just me getting really good at avoiding anything that made me uncomfortable. I was calling it peace, calling it maturity, calling not wanting to create problems. And for a long time, that worked. I could move forward. I could function. I could show up like everything was fine, but there was signs I was ignoring. Like how certain situations still made me tense, how some conversations lived rent free in my head, how I could say I'm okay and mean it, but only on the surface. I noticed how quickly I jumped to it's fine before I even checked in with myself of how I actually felt. I noticed how often I told myself I don't need to talk about it when it really meant was I just don't know how. And that's when it clicked for me. Healing isn't supposed to feel like constantly holding your breath. Avoiding feels familiar because it keeps things calm on the outside. Healing feels unfamiliar because it asks you to sit with things on the inside. And I realized that I'd been chosen familiar. Not because I was weak, it's because, I don't know, that's what I learned. I learned that talking things through could feel risky, that emotions could complicate things, that moving on quickly was easier than slowing down. So, of course I avoided it. But realizing that didn't make me feel ashamed. It made me feel aware. Because awareness is a moment you stop repeating patterns automatically. And once I saw I was avoiding, not healing, I couldn't unsee it. I mean, it didn't mean that I suddenly knew what to do next. It just meant that I knew I couldn't stop pretending silence was the same thing as peace. That realization didn't come with closure, it came with honesty. And honestly, that's where healing actually started for me. And once I noticed that pattern, I started to pay attention to all the conversations I kept having in my head, but never out loud. And that's when I had to ask myself a hard question. This is something I didn't even realize I was doing until I actually slowed down and paid attention to my own thoughts. I I'd have conversations in my head or, in the shower. I mean, who doesn't talk to themselves in the shower? Or maybe it's just me. I don't know. But anyways, and not just the casual ones. I mean, like full detailed conversations. Like, I'll imagine how it starts, what I'd say, how I say it, the tone of my voice, their facial expression, their response, my response to the response. Sometimes I'll even imagine myself keeping myself together, which, let's be honest, it's imagination. And then I never really have the conversation. I'd walk away from it feeling drained, like I already lived it, like I already showed up emotionally, even though in real life nothing happened. And for a long time, I told myself that was maturity. I told myself I was being patient, that I was choosing my battles, that I was protecting my peace. And some days that's true, but other days, if I'm really being honest with myself, I wasn't even protecting my peace. I was protecting myself from feeling, because saying how you feel is risky. It opens the doors to being misunderstood, to your feelings being pushed away, to having someone see you in a way you can't control. So instead of taking that risk, I'd rehearse. I tell myself, okay, maybe I'll bring things up later. Maybe now's not the right time. Maybe it's not that serious. And I became really good at convincing myself that silence was the responsible choice. But here's what I started noticing. Those conversations I didn't have, they didn't go away. They replayed when I wasn't alone. They popped up when I wasn't trying to relax. They showed up as overthinking, tension, emotional exhaustion. They show up as 3 a.m. thoughts. And sometimes they showed up as distance, me pulling back without really knowing why. And that's when it hit me. Avoiding the conversation didn't mean I was avoiding the emotion. I was just carrying it quietly. And carrying emotions quietly doesn't even make them lighter. It makes them heavier, because now you're holding the feeling and the silence. I also realized something else that was hard to admit. I didn't avoid these conversations because I didn't care. I avoided them because I cared too much. I cared about keeping the peace. I cared about not hurting anyone. I cared about being too much. And somewhere along the way, I learned that my feelings could be inconvenient. So instead of expressing them, I internalized them. And that pattern felt familiar. It felt like something I learned on early. That moving on quickly was better than slowing down. That talking things through would create tension. That silence was safer than vulnerability. But sitting with my emotions made me realize something important. Silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's just unspoken. And when things stay unspoken, they don't disappear. They just get worse. They turn into self-doubt, into second-guessing, into emotional exhaustion. And realizing that didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel aware. Aware that I don't need to have every conversation perfectly. Aware that honesty doesn't have to be dramatic. Aware that Speaking up doesn't mean creating conflicts, but it also made me realize that before that I can even have those conversations with anyone else, I have to be honest with myself first. I have to admit when something affected me, when something stayed with me longer than I expected, when silence isn't costing me more than the truth would, and that's still something I'm learning. I'm not suddenly fearless. I don't always say the right thing. And I definitely still rehearse sometimes. Not sometimes, like always. But but now when I catch myself doing it, I pause and ask, am I staying quiet because it feels right or because it feels safer? And that question alone has changed a lot for me. So instead of rushing myself to finally say all the right things, I started practicing something that felt just as uncomfortable: sitting with feeling first. Once I started noticing my patterns, the avoiding, the rehearsing, the silence, I realized something else. I didn't know how to sit with my emotions. I knew how to distract myself. I knew how to keep busy. I knew how to joke things away. But sitting with a feeling without fixing it, without explaining it, without pushing it away, that felt weird. At first, I thought sitting with my emotions meant I had to understand them immediately. Like I needed clarity or reason or some kind of lesson, but that just became another way of avoiding. So, what did I do? I started small. Sometimes sitting with my emotions literally meant sitting in silence for a few minutes instead of grabbing my phone. Not trying to do anything productive, just trying to calm myself down and noticing. And honestly, it was uncomfortable. My mind wanted to rush to label the feeling, to make it make sense, but I kept reminding myself, I don't need to solve this right now. I just need to stay. There were moments where emotions came up and my instinct was to judge myself for them. Like, girl, why am I still feeling like this? Shouldn't I be over this by now? And instead of going down that spiral, I practiced saying, okay, this is what I'm feeling today. No timeline, no pressure, no fixing. Some days, sitting with my emotions look like letting myself cry without immediately thinking, wiping my tears and moving on. Not apologizing to myself for it, not telling myself to be stronger, just letting things happen. Other days, it looked like admitting I was frustrated or sad, even if I didn't even know why. And that was just hard because I've always wanted my feelings to be justified. But emotions don't need permission to exist, they just need space. Over time, something shifted. The more I allowed myself to feel without rushing, the less overwhelming emotions became. Not because they disappeared, but because I wasn't fighting them anymore. I started realizing that emotions are temporary when you let them move through you. They get stuck when you ignore them. And sitting with them taught me something important about myself. I'm capable of handling discomfort. I don't need to escape it. I don't need to numb it. I can sit in it and still be okay. That was empowering in a quiet way. Not loud confidence, not just instant feeling of feeling healed, just trust. Trust that I won't abandon myself when things feel heavy. Trust I don't need to rush my process. Trust that feeling deeply doesn't make me weak. And honestly, that trust changed how I show up everywhere else. Because once you learn how to sit with your emotions, you stop being afraid of them. And learning to sit with my emotions changed how I show up for myself. What I'm slowly learning is once I stopped running from emotions, I started noticing small changes of how to show up for myself. Nothing dramatic, no overnight transformation, just quiet changes that will soon all add up. I know I need to listen to myself more, which we all know. Anyways, not just when things felt good, but especially when they don't. Instead of immediately pushing feelings aside, I need to ask myself, okay, what do I need right now? Sometimes I need space instead of forcing myself to be okay. Sometimes I need honesty instead of silence. In times I've done this, I might have noticed that a part of me stops second guessing myself of how I truly feel. Before I'd question my reactions, I'd wonder if I was being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But sitting with my emotions helped me trust them. But in the sense that every feeling deserved to be acknowledged. And that trust changed how I spoke to myself. As I continued to learn about myself, I stopped being so harsh when things felt heavy. I need to stop telling myself to just get over it. I need to stop minimizing my own experiences. Another thing I noticed was how I've handled boundaries. Boundaries disconnect from your emotions. Boundaries feel confusing. You don't know what's too much. You don't know when to speak up. You don't know when to take a step back. The more I stay connected of how I felt, the clearer my boundaries became. Trust me, learning how to set boundaries isn't easy. I didn't feel the need to over-explain myself as much. I didn't feel guilty for needing space. I didn't feel like I had to keep the peace at my own expense. And honestly, this has been all new for me. I also became more present in my own life. I wasn't just moving through things with no emotions. I was actually noticing how moments felt. I could enjoy things without feeling them, and when things felt hard, I didn't immediately try to escape them. That balance made me feel more grounded with myself. Like I was finally living my life instead of avoiding it all. And I just want to be clear about this part. This didn't make everything easy. I still have moments where I want to avoid them. I still rehearse conversations. I still get uncomfortable with emotions sometimes, but the difference now is I don't abandon myself in those moments. I don't feel myself. My feelings are inconvenient. I don't rush past them just to look okay. I stay. And learning how to express myself has been a process. Because when you're on your own side, everything else feels less overwhelming. I think the biggest thing I'm learning is this. Showing up for myself doesn't always look confident. Sometimes it looks unsure. Sometimes it looks messy. Sometimes it looks like sitting with the feeling and not knowing what to do with it yet. And I used to think that, man, I was behind. But now I'm realizing that actually what being present looks like. I'm not trying to rush myself into being a healed version of me. I'm just trying to stop abandoning the version of me that's here right now. And that alone has changed how I talk to myself, how I give myself grace, and how I let myself take up the emotional space, even when it's uncomfortable. So, if you're listening and you relate to this, I want you to know that you're not broken. It's all a learning process because it's taking me some time to accept my emotions. I'm far from perfect, and avoiding emotions has affected me in many ways. You need to remember that your feelings are valid. Some people are worth expressing of how you truly feel, and you'll learn who is worth your time and who isn't. Remember that sharing how you feel to whomever is not creating conflicts. I know it goes back to how we were raised or what we were around. It affects us emotionally in the future, struggling to set boundaries and share their emotions. You're learning, and we're all unlearning things together. Thank you to anyone here in my episode. I appreciate your endless support. If you enjoyed my episode, if you were able to relate with this episode, do me a favor and follow me on Instagram at Speaking Into the Void podcast. Until the next episode, take care of yourself, continue to be true to yourself, and keep speaking into the void.